Masterchul to Enterprise. Come in, Enterprise. Masterchul to Enterprise. Beam me off this crazy planet. Oh, hey, everybody. It's me, Masterchul. As you can tell, this episode is going to be about all things Star Trek. And with me today is my special friend, Andrew, who's also a Trekkie. So we're going to talk Star Trek and why we love things Star Trek. All right. Stay tuned. So, Andrew, what was your first memories of watching Star Trek?
I was probably about 4 or 5 years old, and because Star Trek was in syndication, because it was off the air at that time, it was probably one of the few shows that my mom would actually let me watch, and it was really quite enjoyable. And I enjoyed just the interaction between Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Bones, and of course they're the same, but and Scotty, and just the whole crew on how they worked well together. And it was just it really is what started me into enjoying sci-fi altogether. And it was one of the shows that my mom would just let me sit down and watch hours and hours and hours upon. And so I just became enamored with the whole series and how they interacted with each other and the adventures that they would go on, even though I was probably too young to understand the political ramifications at that time of everything that Gene Roddenberry was doing in the original series. I just thought it was really, really cool.
I don't know how old I was when I first started watching Star Trek. I just remember watching it at a very young age. I had a love of sci-fi, and this show was, I remember watching it the very first time and falling in love with it. It was like the characters were very interesting to me. You know, we have this brave John Wayne-ish kind of captain who was, the ladies' man, and he was the action hero. And then you had Spock, who was this logical, half human, half Vulcan interaction. And it was just the way the crew clicked together. It just made the very story very interesting. And there was Uhura, and there was Sulu, and there was Chekhov, and of course Scotty and the Doctor. And I just liked the way the characters interacted with each other, and the stories were very engaging to me. And as the earliest memory I remember, I would make macaroni and cheese, and me and my dad would watch Star Trek. So it was not only a chance for us to bond a little bit, but it was an opportunity for me to watch a show that I loved anyway. So tell me about one of your favorite episodes that you remember, and why is it your favorite episode?
I think one of my favorite episodes, there's a couple of them, but just to pick one out of the top of the air is the Doomsday Machine. And the reason I liked it is because when I was a kid, with everything that was going on with the Cold War, there was always the threat of nuclear weapons, and this big monstrosity of a ship came out and was chewing up worlds, and they had to figure out how to stop it, so they didn't. And the one captain who lost his ship and lost his crew to this Doomsday Machine, he was so bent on getting this machine destroyed that he ended up taking his own life because of his obsession. And the cooler heads of Kirk and Spock and Scotty were able to figure out a way to stop this machine without any more loss of life, and to basically just put an end to it. And they just hoped and prayed that there was no more. But that was just one of the things. And I thought it was how the one guy was so obsessed about it, trying to destroy it, that it actually took his own life. And I thought that it was interesting how somebody's consumption or obsession can end up ruining them in the long run. And I thought that was always just kind of fascinating.
Okay. one of my favorite episodes, and I'm horrible with names and remembering titles, so you correct me if you know the name of this one, but it's the episode where this is from TOS, of course. I'm the biggest TOS fan, but the episode was where the aliens had black on one side and white on the other, and then the other alien race had white on one side and black on the other. And as you can imagine, that particular episode is timeless because it is extremely relevant to what's going on in the world right now. And in the episode, everybody except for them could see the ridiculousness of what they were fighting about. You know, the one alien would look at the other alien and say he was inferior because, come on, he's black on one side and white on the other. Can't you see he's inferior? But yet the crew of the Starship Enterprise was like, no, you guys are basically the same. The only genetic difference is you have different coloration, pigmentation. And it was like a message from all those years ago about something that has never changed in all of history. That we are still, as a group of people, as a species, still prejudiced in many ways. And definitely, you know, with things that are going on now. And at the very end of the episode, they're stuck together and they're still fighting to the end of time, basically. And they've never worked out their differences. They chose rather to fight. And I thought the piece was very relevant then, and of course the piece is still very relevant now, and it's by far one of my favorite episodes. So I think this is like one of everybody's favorite question. Which of the series is by far your favorite, and why?
TOS, because it was my first introduction. The original series, how can you not love the original? I mean, there's a lot of great franchises and branch offs and stuff like that, but it was just, I find myself when I want to watch Star Trek, even though I watch the other series, I just love going back to the original series and watching some of my favorite episodes, and just how that it's still a draw to me, and I enjoy it probably more than almost anything else.
Okay, all right. Okay, this is an easy one for me. It was always TOS for me. Like I said, it was the first time I had watched Star Trek, and so I grew up with those characters. And for me, it was all about Spock. I loved the fact that he had this sense of logic and rationale, and but he was also, there would be sides of him that were human that would come out, and you would see a very different side of Spock. And it was very interesting to see him always in conflict with what he wants to be. He wants to be the logical scientist, you know, everything is logic, but then the human side of him wants to be human, wants to feel, wants to have feelings and emotions. And it was interesting to see how he integrated those two parts together in the series. And I just love the interaction of him with the other characters. And of course, as you can see by my shirt here, I'm all about Spock, so TOS would be definitely my favorite of all time. Okay, so in the Star Trek franchise, name two that you really enjoyed watching, and then name one that perhaps wasn't in your top list, and why.
My first one, of course, is TOS, and then I really enjoyed Enterprise. But Enterprise and Deep Space Nine are probably in my top two-ish, three-ish, kind of in there. And then honestly, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate on this, but The Next Generation was not my favorite.
Oh.
And some people aren't going to like that, but I found a lot of it boring. It took a long time to get into. The last two seasons were absolutely great. But when it takes 7 seasons for me to really get into it, it was kind of a struggle to get through. But I also think the other reason why I didn't like it as much, because it's like, who are these new guys taking over by Kirk and Spock, and who's the next one? And so it was the first iteration of Star Trek that wasn't the original series, and being a big TOS fan, it was kind of like, yeah, this is just trash. And it's bias, I understand, but I didn't. And I've watched them, and I've watched The Next Gen again after watching Picard, and I enjoyed it, but it's still not my favorite. I could gravitate to other variations of Star Trek before I jump into The Next Generation.
Okay. Okay, well, in order of the two favorite, of course, would be TOS, number one. And I really liked Next Generation because that was the next one I ended up watching. You know, I liked Data, I liked Picard. So I would have to say TOS followed by The Next Generation. And the thing about the least favorite, it's not that it was the least favorite, it was just really hard for me to get into was, I know some people are going to moan about this, but DS9. I just couldn't get into DS9. It just, maybe it was at the time that I started watching it. Maybe I should give it a rewatch. But I probably only watched about a season and a half and just kind of lost interest. And I felt like it was a very different format than a lot of the other franchises. It was just me, though. I mean, there was characters I did enjoy on the show. I liked Odo, and I thought Neelix was okay. I wasn't a big Cisco fan, per se, but there were characters on there that I liked, and perhaps if I gave it another view, you know, my opinion might change about that. But that, as it stands right now, TOS followed by Generation, and then DS9 would be probably my least favorite. So out of all the franchises and all the TV shows and movies, what would you say is your favorite character of all time?
Well, I don't have one. I have two.
Okay.
One, Spock is by far my favorite character out of everybody. And then pretty much Montgomery Scott. Scotty is just bad to the bone. He can fix anything and to repair. Always pulls him out of a jam. He's always that Mr. Reliable and is just an amazing individual and a great solid friend that will never let you down. The thing I like about Spock so much is that how logical he is, how he never lets anybody down, but you might not agree with everything that he has to say, but it's always a well thought out process of why you should do something or how you should do it.
Okay, my favorite character. Obviously, at this point, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anybody, but my favorite character, of course, is Spock. You know, I've always been fascinated by his character. I've been fascinated by his sense of logic. But more than anything, as the show has progressed and the different movies, he has been shown to be a very loyal friend, you know, and there was this sense about him that he was always in conflict with himself, you know, between being half Vulcan and half human. And I enjoyed seeing the interactions that he had with the fellow cast and also with himself, that the different things that he experienced throughout the Star Trek movies and the TV shows, you know. And I've always been fascinated with this character. And I think Leonard Nimoy was the perfect actor to play Spock, you know. And I do like Zachary Quinto, who played Spock in the J.J. Abrams adaptation of the movies. I think he does a really good job too. But of course, my ultimate favorite would be Leonard Nimoy playing Spock in the original series. And if Spock hadn't been in the show, I don't think it would have been as engaging for me. I think the other characters by themselves wouldn't have been as entertaining to me or as very interesting. I think Spock definitely is the centerpiece, the MVP for me. He really made me want to watch the show, and I was very intrigued by his character and his character development. Without a doubt, Spock would be my number one choice for best character. So out of all the Star Trek franchises, in your opinion, what alien race, or human race for that matter, would you like to be?
Alien race. Well, there'd be two. One's Vulcan, and that's self-explanatory. But honestly, I really like the Klingons. And I know they weren't always the best of people, but when you watch The Next Generation and even in Deep Space Nine, they kind of came around and became really great friends and really loyal and would go to battle for any one of the people that they cared about. I liked their loyalty. I liked their sense of duty and honor. And there was times where Klingons weren't so honorable, but for the most part, like when Lieutenant Worf, he had to go back and defend his family honor because his dad was a traitor. even though that he actually proved that his dad wasn't the traitor and it was another Klingon, in order to save the Empire and keep it solid, he was willing to basically take one for the Klingon team and be able to take that dishonor and live with it, and he was okay with it because it served the greater good. And I just like that aspect about it.
Nice. If I had to pick one alien race, it would definitely be Vulcan. But let me clarify that. Not just Vulcan. I would like to be half Vulcan, half human. Because I find that those two characteristics of Spock were the most intriguing, were the most endearing. You know, his conflict between being logic, but his conflict between having emotions and how he learned to adapt to having both, I think was a very interesting character development in the TV show. So to clarify my answer, not just Vulcan or not just human, but half Vulcan, half human. Because I feel like in that way, you get the best of both worlds. So one of the longest feuds in sci-fi history is Star Trek versus Star Wars. What's your opinion about that, Andrew?
Well, a lot of people are going to hate on this, but I got to be honest. Star Trek is a thinking man's show. Not very nice, but pretty accurate. With the social issues that Star Trek dealt with over just being a action-packed great movie, completely I like the way it works out a little bit more as far as thinking through social issues and how do you deal with them and things like that. Don't get me wrong, I still love Star Wars. And the thing I like most about Star Wars is because it's an escape from reality for me. I am not so much tied up into like watching the movies and thinking about what's going on and how they're going to get through it and stuff like that. You just watch a great action-packed movie with amazing characters and a lot of fun. I really can't say I like one over the other. I just think that they're both different, to where Star Wars is more of a Western, and it's a great aspect of that, along with some samurai movie thrown in there, to where Star Trek is more Shakespearean, and it's more of a thinking person's show. So they're two very different. So it's kind of like, to me, it's like kind of comparing apples to oranges. So you really can't compare them, but I'm definitely, of course, a bigger Star Trek fan than I ever am a Star Wars fan. But I still love both the genres, and I love both the stories because I think that they have a lot to offer and to have stuff for everybody to enjoy.
Well, good answer. I like that. Well, thanks for your time today, Andrew. And as always, live long and prosper. Okay, and of course, everybody's longest sci-fi, Civil War, Star Wars versus Star Trek. Now, I'm going to be honest. I didn't have any Star Trek stuff when I was little. I didn't have any toys, any posters. I had a ton of Star Wars posters, Star Wars bedspread, Star Wars cards. Star Wars was the thing. Star Wars, I played a lot of Star Wars because Star Wars was a huge thing. You have to realize when Star Trek was in the height of its popularity, I was too young to watch Star Trek. I didn't have any idea what Star Trek was. I didn't even see the original movie when it came out until much later. You know, the thing of it is even Star Wars, when it first originally came out, I didn't see it the first time it was out at the theater because I was too young. And my parents didn't let me go see movies without knowing what the heck they're sending me off to go see. So, I'll admit it, yes, Star Wars, and I still enjoy Star Wars. It's not that I don't enjoy Star Wars. I still like Star Wars quite a bit. But without a doubt, if I had to pick one over the other, it would be Star Trek. And I feel, as Andrea said, Star Trek is like the thinking man's sci-fi, where Star Wars was the action-packed special effects. There's a little bit of, background story, of course, and things going on, but I always felt like Star Trek was relevant to things going on in the world now, whereas Star Wars was this fictional, made-up fantasy world, and where Star Trek had relevance. It didn't matter when you were watching it. The stories were still relevant to things going on in the world right now, or at the time that you were watching them. So, yes, I like Star Wars, but I am definitely a Trekkie over a Star Wars person. hands down. Anyway, I hope you found this video entertaining. And remember, live long and prosper, my friends. Live long and prosper.